ADANNA'S hair grew and grew and grew and never stopped growing. At first, she loved it. Forest girl! Her name changed because the hairs on her head became a forest. The logs found people in their homes and tangled on anything. The legs of the playing children around a sleeping dogs. Then people began to get mist inside her hair. I bet you are yet to hear a story as chilling as this. Welcome to ADANNA African Folktales. Remember to like our story. ADANNA was sculpted by the gods. Everyone said so. Her skin glowed like polished mahogany under the sun. Her body curved in ways that made men stutter and women stare. When she entered a room, conversations paused. Necklaces stopped swinging. Phones were lowered. Even laughter seemed to hush mid-air, as though the world itself held its breath. But beauty, as the elders say, is a heavy thing to carry when your soul is bleeding. Because beneath the sculpted figure, behind those sultry eyes and high cheekbones, was a wound, one no one could see, one that never stopped aching. ADANNA had been born bald. Not just a newborn's baldness, the kind that fades as the weeks roll by and tufts of fuzz appear. No. Her scalp was smooth, polished, unnaturally perfect, like glass. Her mother cried when the hair never came. The village midwives offered herbs and oils, the prophets prayed. The native doctors mixed strange-smelling pastes and rubbed her scalp in moonlight. There was even a time when her mother tied cowries to ADANNA'S head and buried a comb in the backyard, some ritual of calling the strands home. But nothing worked. Not a single hair, ever. Children in school used to call her Unwanyokute, stone bride. They'd laugh and ask, when last did your comb cry? ADANNA smiled through it, but her pillows knew her tears. As she grew older, the mockery faded. Her beauty swallowed their laughter. Her figure became her revenge, and suddenly everyone wanted to be near her. Girls tried to walk like her, boys tried to touch her. She had the kind of presence that made people forget to blink. But not ADANNA. She could not forget. Hair was all she wanted. Not the wig she bought in Lagos, not the expensive Brazilian bundles, not the head wraps and scarves that she tied with practiced elegance. No. She didn't want to borrow beauty. She wanted her own. ADANNA envied hair the way the desert envies rain. She would watch other women run their hands through their curls, tie up braids in thick buns, or let loose silky strands that danced in the wind. To her, they weren't women. They were queens. And she, despite her fame, her photo shoots, her admirers, felt like a fraud, wearing a crown that was never hers. She scrolled endlessly through social media, zooming in on pictures of influencers with cascading locks, afro-puffed naturals, waist-length dreadlocks, mermaids. Oh, the mermaids in fantasy books, their hair was always their power. ADANNA would sit in the dark, hugging her knees and whisper, God, just give me hair. Not riches, not fame, just hair. I want to feel the wind pull it. I want to tuck it behind my ear. I want to braid it. Please, just hair. But heaven was silent. Sometimes silence is messy, but ADANNA took it as cruelty. Her mother stopped talking about it altogether. It was the one subject they tiptoed around, like a ghost that lived in the room. People complimented her beauty, but ADANNA would stiffen every time someone said, "You're perfect," because she wasn't. She knew the truth. Beauty was not her smooth skin or her sharp jawline. Beauty, real beauty, grew from the scalp like a secret garden, and hers was barren, a wasteland. She had everything, except the one thing she craved. The one thing that seemed to define womanhood itself. Hair. And when her silent prayer turned into obsession, when her envy began to boil into bitterness, something ancient heard her cry, "Nonye Okute, stone wife."
Oh, Something with long flowing locks that dragged behind her like a veil of drowning souls. Something that once lost her beauty too and wanted it back. And that was when ADANNA'S story stopped being human and became something else. Every night, ADANNA prayed for one thing: hair. Not money, not fame, not love, just hair. Long, flowing, living hair. The kind that danced in the wind like it had a soul. The kind you could part with your fingers and twirl around your wrist. Hair that bounced when you laughed, tangled when you slept, and smelt like lavender after a wash. Hair that made you feel like a woman, not a statue. ADANNA would lie in bed at night, her scalp cold against the pillow, fingers curled into fists as tears slid down her temples. God, are you listening? Just one strand, just one strand. But each morning, she'd wake up and feel the same smooth, empty surface, her skull like a polished mirror, reflecting everything she wasn't. She followed influencers religiously. Their Instagram reels, TikToks, and YouTube wash day routines were her silent summons. The brushing, the trimming, the twisting, she watched it all with burning envy. There were girls who dyed their hair pink one week and shaved half of it off the next, and they still looked beautiful. ADANNA? She didn't even have the option. But the thing that cut deepest were the mermaids. In the old folk tales her grandmother told her, the mermaids were goddesses of the deep. They didn't walk, they swam. They didn't speak, they sang. But above all, their power was in their hair, cascading waterfalls of silk, thick enough to hide whole fish inside, strong enough to pull drowning men to their deaths. To ADANNA, they weren't monsters, they were queens, and she longed to be one of them. Chike, sweet, loyal, doting Chike, told her she was perfect. He'd trace her cheekbones with his thumb and say things like, "You don't even need hair, you're beyond it." She would force a smile, say, "Thank you," pretend to believe him. But later, alone in her bathroom, she would stare at her reflection and feel nothing but rage. "What use is all this beauty?" she would whisper, touching the empty dome of her head, "if I can't grow even a single strand?" Her rage festered, became bitterness, then madness, until one night, she broke. It was a moonless night at first. Then the moon rose like a silver eye, crescent and cruel. The wind was soft, but the trees didn't sway. The road to the river was narrow, covered in bush, and locals often avoided it. There were whispers about that river. They said something lived there, something beautiful, something hungry. But ADANNA didn't care anymore. She wore a simple wrapper tied around her chest and carried nothing with her. No light, no protection, not even her phone. She wanted to be seen. She wanted the goddess to hear her. As she approached the water, a strange stillness settled over the forest. The frogs stopped croaking. The breeze died. Even the insects seemed to vanish. And then the river shimmered. Not like water, like glass being broken beneath the surface. ADANNA stepped forward, her knees trembling. She knelt at the edge and whispered, "Mother of the river, I've come." At first, nothing. Into ripples, ripples turned into waves, and then the goddess appeared. She rose from the center of the river as though lifted by invisible hands. Her skin glowed like obsidian kissed by firelight. Her eyes were deep and hollow, like they had seen the beginning and end of time. Her hair floated around her like a living veil, long, thick, flowing like smoke underwater. When she spoke, her voice was silk and steel, sweet and terrifying. "You dare to summon me, child?" ADANNA fell flat, forehead against the mud. "Please, I need hair. I want to be whole." The goddess tilted her head, smiled with no warmth. "So many come to me for beauty, but beauty is never free." ADANNA'S lips trembled. "I'll give you anything." The river goddess drifted closer. Her face hovered inches above ADANNA'S. Her voice turned into a whisper that crawled into ADANNA'S ear like cold breath.
your chest, your full, proud breasts. Give them to me, and I will crown you with the hair of the sea." Adanna gasped, instinctively shielding her chest. Her heart pounded. "What?" The goddess smiled wider. Her teeth were too white, too sharp. She ran her fingers through her own hair, and it glowed, alive. "Your beauty is your currency. Give me yours, and I will give you mine." Adanna's throat dried. She had always been proud of her breasts, round, full, perfect, but they meant nothing without the one thing she lacked. She took a deep breath. "I accept." The goddess placed a cold hand on her head. The water around her glowed blue. The air froze. Something unseen ripped through her chest, not with pain, but with emptiness, a hollowing, a taking. Adanna screamed silently, and then hair. It sprouted, first in gentle tufts, then in wild, dark waves. 6 strands pushed out from her skull like they'd been waiting for years. It grew past her ears, past her shoulders, down her back. She laughed, cried. Hair! Real, thick, beautiful hair. She danced, splashing in the river. She pulled it over her face, ran her fingers through it. She even asked the goddess for a picture, a selfie, and the goddess obliged. 1 click, 1 flash. Adanna had won. Or so she thought. By the time she got home, the hair had reached her knees. By morning, it coiled around her calves. By noon, it dragged behind her like a wedding train. By evening, it moved. It twitched. It slithered. It wrapped. First around her toes, then her legs. She thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. That night, she woke up gasping. The hair had wrapped around her throat, tightening slowly like a python testing her breath. She fought it off, screaming. She chopped at it with kitchen scissors, but every strand she cut grew back thicker and faster. The drains clogged, the pipes burst, the floors flooded. Her house smelt of rot and river salt. People stopped admiring her. They crossed the street when they saw her. Children screamed. Strangers whispered. One woman called her a demon. Another threw holy water on her. She couldn't go outside anymore. She couldn't even sleep without tying her hair down with ropes. It was no longer hair. It was a forest. A wild growing thing. A curse made of roots and memory. And now it wanted something else. At first, it was a miracle. The hair, the hair, thick, black, and coiling like the rivers of ancient lands. It fell over Adanna's shoulders in waves and kissed her spine with every step. It bounced when she walked. It glistened when the sun touched it. Women gasped, men gawked, even children stared in awe. She was finally whole, but the miracle did not stop growing. By the 2nd week, the strands reached her ankles. By the 3rd, they coiled around her feet like stubborn vines. Her comb snapped, her wigs were discarded. She didn't need them anymore, not with this beauty. But then came the whispers and the weight. At first, she thought she was imagining it. A faint rustle at night, like dry leaves brushing against each other. But there were no leaves in her room, no trees. Only her hair. She would lie awake, heart pounding, while the strands around her head shivered and stirred. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't mice. It was her hair, whispering. She tried to pull it back into a bun, but it resisted. It twisted out of the scarf and slithered across the bed like a restless child. And then the things began to come. Birds. The first time it happened, she thought she was dreaming. A robin nestled near her left ear, building a nest from twigs and broken shoelaces. The chapping woke her up. She screamed. She shook her head violently, but the bird just fluttered deeper into the jungle growing from her scalp. She tried to chase it out with a stick. The stick snapped in half. Later, she felt movement again, but this time it wasn't feathers. It was skittering. Quick and light, like feet, tiny feet. She ran to the mirror, panting, and saw them. Rats, burrowing, tunneling, living. Her scalp was no longer her own. It had become a habitat, a cursed forest that fed on her life. The smell came next: damp earth, old water, sweat, rotting flowers. Adana bathed twice a day, scrubbing with salt and lemon and black soap. But the smell came from within, from the roots, from whatever the hair had become. Strangers began to back away from her in the market. Dogs barked when she passed. Children screamed, pointing, "Mommy, her hair is alive!" And still, it grew.
Like shackles, wrapped her waist like a belt, snaked into her shoes, tangled around furniture, clogged the drains, cracked the tiles. She couldn't move freely. She couldn't sleep properly. She couldn't even eat without pulling back ropes of hair that tried to feed themselves. She began to hear voices inside the strands, faint, whispery, but growing louder. "You wanted this. You asked for beauty. Now wear it. Feed us." She tried to cut it. She tried everything. Scissors snapped like twigs. Knives dulled. She even held a flaming torch once, just once, to a lock of it. The fire hissed and went out. Not slowly, like something smothered it. That night, the hair wrapped tightly around her neck and squeezed until she passed out. When she woke, her lips were blue, her tongue dry, her voice hoarse and trembling. Her neighbor said she had become a mad woman, always whispering to herself, always covered in moving shadows. No one came to visit anymore, except Chike. Poor Chike. He would stand at her gate and call her name for hours. "Adanna, please, open the door. I still love you, no matter what. Let me in." But she couldn't. Not anymore. Her house was no longer a house. It was a nest. The walls were webbed with thick braids that pulsed like veins. The floor was a carpet of tangled coils. She had to crawl to the kitchen. The mirrors were covered because what she saw in them no longer looked like her. She had become a shadow of herself. Skin pale, eyes hollow, back stooped from the weight of the crown she had begged for. One night, she sat in the middle of her room, arms wrapped around her knees, and whispered, "Please, I changed my mind. Take it back. I don't want it anymore." But the hair didn't answer. It just twitched and laughed. And then she vanished. One ordinary Tuesday, just before sunrise, the gate to her compound creaked open. A neighbor on his way to the mosque saw her from afar. She walked barefoot, bent forward, her hair dragging behind her like a black river. She headed toward the market. No one saw her return. Her mother raised alarm. Chike searched the city. People shared her photo online. There were whispers of kidnapping, suicide, madness. But the truth? Adanna never left. She was still there, trapped, somewhere deep inside the knots, the curls, the vines, wandering, screaming. Her mind had splintered like old wood. She forgot who she was. She forgot how to speak. Her dreams were filled with running, but the vines always found her. She called out for Chike, for her mother, for the river goddess, for anyone, but no one heard her. Not through all that hair. And worse, she wasn't alone anymore. Something else had followed her into the darkness. It was whispering too. While Adanna wandered in madness, far from the living and farther from herself, the river was calm, deceptively calm, still on the surface, but beneath it, life pulsed. The water darkened as it deepened, turning from silver to ink. Silence ruled down there.
Not the quiet of peace, but the kind that pressed against your ears and filled your lungs with dread. Nothing moved for a while. Then suddenly, a ripple, a flash of movement, something gliding. The goddess was feeding. She lay on a throne of coral and skulls, carved by water pressure and time. Her skin shimmered like oil on blood. Her eyes, two perfect stones, glowed through the murk. Around her breast clustered 7 creatures, her sons, but not born of womb, born of bagging. They were not quite children. Their torsos were small and smooth, like human infants, but with long, knotted fingers tipped in claws. Their faces looked eerily human, but too perfect, too still. Their eyes were wide and unblinking. Where legs should have been were scaled serpent tails that twitched and wrapped around each other like vines, hungry for sun. They suckled, greedily. Each mouth latched on like a leech, draining magic, youth, and power. They were feeding not on the goddess's own body, but on something borrowed, something once mortal, ADANNA'S breasts, her gift, her sacrifice. The goddess had taken them long ago, not just the flesh, but the meaning, the warmth, the pride, the motherhood she had never tasted but dreamed of. She wore ADANNA'S body like a stolen jewel, pressing it to her cold, ancient frame. The sons were growing. With each feeding, their skin glowed brighter, their claws sharpened, their tails thickened. Their mother moaned softly, not from pain, but pleasure, a divine pleasure. The satisfaction of a goddess who never gives back what is taken. Above the water, the world had become a knot. ADANNA'S hair was no longer hair. It had transformed into something unnatural, a living labyrinth. It spread without permission, crossing property lines and devouring boundaries. It crawled up trees, wrapped around rooftops, and spilled over fences. It slid under doors. It slithered across roads. It swallowed animals. Chickens vanished into the brush that sprouted from her scalp. She was no longer a woman. She was terrain. Children who wandered too close to her house were dragged back, screaming. One boy said he saw eyes blinking in the vines. Another claimed he heard a heartbeat thumping beneath the coils, loud and slow like a sleeping god. Nobody visited anymore. The neighborhood went quiet. Birds nested in the thick canopy of her hair. Owls perched on the high tangles and stared down with knowing eyes. It started slowly. One tuft of her hair crept across her porch like a vine. No one noticed. Then another. Then a coil uncurled in the night and reached the garden wall. It moved like something with thought, with direction, not the way hair should move. By dawn, the first of the vegetable beds were gone, choked under matted strands, blacker than night. Still, the villagers said nothing. They'd learned to fear what was happening in that house. They called her ADANNA the Vanished, a beauty undone by her own desire. Mothers whispered warnings to their daughters. Vanity is the devil's mirror. Don't stare too long. But by then, it was already too late. Her hair had stopped being hair. It had become something else, something hungry, something ancient.
Under skin. It moved even when there was no wind. It responded to sound. It breathed. The stories began when the goats went missing. Chickens, too. People said the animals had wandered near her gate, pecking or grazing, and simply disappeared. Gone. No feathers, no bones, only silence, and the whisper of movement, like silk dragging on a wet floor. Then came the children. Little Ayo was first, 5 years old, fast-footed and wild with curiosity. He had dared his sister to follow him past the path that led to ADANNA'S overgrown yard. She said no. She waited. He didn't come back. All they found was one small shoe, tangled in black strands that writhed like worms. After that, the warnings grew louder. Stay away from her gate. She's no longer a woman. She's become terrain. They weren't wrong. Her house was no longer a home. It was a living labyrinth, a nest of impossibilities. Her hair had burst through the windows. It crawled across the floors, strangled the walls, broke through the roof. It stretched beyond the yard, across neighbors' fences, over garden plots, down the village road. It spread like a curse, with no roots and no mercy. It knew no boundary. It wrapped around tree trunks and left them strangled. It slipped under doors, found its way into kitchens and huts. At night, it moved more freely. And by dawn, people woke to find new knots outside their doors, wet with dew and smelling of sweat. One boy, barely 10, swore he saw eyes in the vines. They blinked, he said. They blinked and then smiled. Another claimed he heard a heartbeat beneath the coils, loud and slow, like the drums of something sleeping, but not dead. Soon the path to ADANNA'S home became an abandoned stretch of earth. No footsteps dared cross it. The birds stopped singing near her gate. Dogs refused to walk past. Chickens flapped away in terror when the wind blew from her direction. Only the owls came. They perched high in the canopy that had grown from her scalp, that thick, twisting crown of hair that now towered into the sky like trees. The owls stared down with yellow eyes, blinking too slowly, as if they knew what would come next. And the hair kept growing. It grew across the village square. It wrapped around the church bell. It swept over market stalls, dragging mangoes and cassava into its clutch. It reached into wells and clogged them. It cracked walls, split fences, swallowed motorbikes, and left tangled trails behind. Still, no one came near. ADANNA, who once brought suitors from neighboring towns, was now a name spoken only in hushed breath. A myth, not a girl. A warning, not a memory. A legend born too early. The village began to rot from its edges inward. Shops closed, families fled. The air turned damp, heavy with the scent of hair oil and decay. Even the sky dimmed, as if the sun refused to shine too brightly on what she had become. Because she wasn't just cursed. She was transforming from woman to forest, from beauty to myth, from desire to destruction. And in the center of it all, in the deepest core of the ever-growing maze of her own making, ADANNA sat. Not dead, not quite alive. Her body was bound in her own strands, her legs tied, her arms buried, her mouth gagged by her own desire. Only her eyes remained, and they watched, wide, wet, silent. It became a forest, a cursed one. ADANNA had tried. She had tried everything. She soaked her head in kerosene and struck a match with trembling fingers, but the fire died with a hiss. Not a burn, a refusal. The hair recoiled, then surged forward, coiling around her arms and legs like a snake claiming prey. She ran to the river, where her story had begun. She knelt by its edge, broken, bent, covered in her own black vines like a prisoner in mourning. She whispered to the water, "I want it back. Take it. Take the hair. Give me my body back, please." The surface remained still for a moment. Then it rippled, softly, and from the deep, the goddess rose. Her face broke the surface slowly, too slowly, like a corpse reawakening. She smiled wide, teeth too white, eyes too calm. Her stolen breasts bobbed above the water, still leaking faint, glowing milk. Her sons swam around her, their tiny heads peeking above the waves like watching spirits. She looked at Adana and laughed, a sound that echoed like thunder in a cave. She said, "I'm feeding. Come back after harvest. Maybe." Then she sank. No splash, no trace, just stillness. Adana fell to her knees, her hair wet and writhing around her like serpents mourning a lost queen. She screamed. The trees didn't move. The sky didn't care. Only the birds tripped above, perched in what used to be her crown, her pride, her beauty. From then on, she stopped speaking. Her tongue grew heavy. Her voice faded like a candle left in the rain. People forgot what her laughter sounded like, but they remembered her story. That's the girl who got lost in her own hair. They spoke of her like a fable, a warning, a ghost who still walks when the wind is strong and the air smells like river mud. They say if you stand near her old house at night and listen carefully, you'll hear it. The rustle, not of trees.
Adanna is still calling, still wandering, still waiting for the harvest that may never come. Chike came once more, not with flowers, not with sweet words or hope. He came with trembling hands and red eyes, eyes that had forgotten how to rest. The village children whispered when they saw him pass, carrying a small clay lamp and a calabash of palm wine. They knew where he was going, and they knew who waited for him there. He hadn't seen her in weeks, but the rumors never stopped. They said her house was no longer a house, but a burial mound made of hair, that vines now grew from the roof, that cats who climbed in never came back out, that sometimes at night something inside sobbed. They said the trees bent toward her home now, as if listening. And yet, Chike walked on. He crossed the narrow path through the bush, where the leaves whispered his name. He passed the stream where they used to wash their feet and splash each other, laughing like fools. But the water there had grown darker too, heavier, as though it mourned what had been lost. When he reached her door, it wasn't there anymore. There was no wood, no frame, only a curtain of black hair, thick and matted, hanging like funeral drapes. He pushed through. The smell hit him first, mildew, rot, something animal. Then came the silence. No birds, no breeze, just breathing. Not his, something else. And then he saw her. Adanna. She was curled in the center of the room, or what used to be a room. Now it was a nest, a tangled cage. Hair hung from the ceiling like jungle vines. It covered the walls. It lined the floor in carpets of matted roots. She sat in it like a statue, her spine curved, her knees to her chest. A crown of twisted coils piled so high above her they touched the rafters. The hair covered her neck, her mouth, her ears. Only one hand was visible, limp and pale. Chike knelt by her. His tears came too easily. His voice cracked before it reached her. Adanna, he whispered, holding the cold, lifeless hand. I loved you bald. I loved you true. The hand didn't squeeze back. Her lips, if they were still there, were hidden under thick ropes of hair. Her eyes were shut or gone. Her breath was shallow. Her tears leaked sideways, sliding into the locks, disappearing into the mass that had become her. Her beauty was gone, her face nearly forgotten. All that remained was hair, endless, devouring, alive. That week,